It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
It is the Dev Friday Show. It is with Mark and Tim, and we are all of what, 3, 4? I don't know how many weeks late we are, but we're 15 minutes early today because I needed to get done before I had a now recurring meeting. So been a while.
It's been so long. I thought the AI replaced you, Tim.
Well, I think the AI just can't quite swing it. I don't think, but it has been a while. I actually, and whenever this gets on our podcast site thing, we'll see. But I haven't even mixed last time yet.
Or maybe I should say, I was considering having the AI
that's
replace
probably
you.
yeah.
Because you went out MIA, so I was like, well, what am I gonna do? I need a show. So like, let me just get on ChatGPT. Let me just talk to it. Let me then send that text into an audio generator, and there you go.
I'm waiting for that one, right? Because there isn't. Is there an API for it? Here's. I must admit, I don't quite know a lot about how all that works. I know it's OpenAI then created a chat bot using its model, and I guess then they can create an API on top of that chat bot, so you could write code that would chat with ChatGPT if you wanted to, or that would allow someone to chat with GPT. So I guess through that, if you wired that up with like Amazon Poly, you actually could have a conversation, which would be really interesting if you transcribed what you were saying to ChatGPT and it came back and talked to you. You could interview it like you were on a podcast. Although I think people have done that, haven't they?
They're starting to.
People invited ChatGPT onto the podcast
because finding podcast hosts is so difficult, Tim. So we need to go to the AI to find hosts and to find friends. That's the future.
Has a podcast, isn't that how it goes now?
Yeah.
And then we had a podcast before podcasts were popular.
We did. Well, I think podcasts were still around, or they were still, but we were one of the early pioneers. But I think in the Lehigh Valley we were.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure.
Maybe the first podcast in Lehigh Valley.
A bar to set, but okay. Oh my, what a couple weeks.
Yes, how you been?
I'm doing okay. There's one other thing. Oh, that was what I was thinking when you were talking about the AI. Did you see? First of all, Google wants to roll out their AI, and in their video demoing their search chat AI interface thing, it gave back absolutely wrong information. And
can't trust the Googles anymore.
Video of it. It's like nobody caught it up the chain. Nobody was like, "Wait, that's actually wrong." The answer it spit back at us was wrong. Not only that, though, Microsoft, due to their relationship with ChatGPT, right, or OpenAI, now has like a Bing chat interface, right? And I've seen screen caps. I've not tried it for myself.
It's coming to life, Tim.
Yeah,
it's becoming sentient.
I mean, let's define what sentient really is, because the conversation I saw screen caps of was someone asking it what the show times were for Avatar, and it telling them that Avatar was a movie that happened many years ago, but there's a new one coming out, and it will be released in December something 2022, but it's not out yet. And then they were like, "What's today's date?" And and Bing was like, "Oh, today's date is January something 2023." They're like, "Well, then Avatar must be out." They're like, "No, Avatar is not out. It's not out until December of 2022." And they're like, "But that's in the past. It's not in the past. I was wrong before. It is January of 2022. It is not January of 2023. So it's arguing with people about what the date of today is. And then the person was like, "But my phone says it's 2023. And Bing's like, "I think your phone has a virus. It probably has a virus."
It's argumentative. That's great.
So
I love that.
So I mean, the truth is, yeah, you probably could replace me with an AI, and it would be just about as reasonable as a conversation with me. So I did.
Well, since we stopped doing our radio show, our podcast, I have been using ChatGPT a lot and really enjoying it. Just it's a fun kind of research exercise tool, and just kind of playing around. And also kind of seeing how much it can replace my normal developer Google searching. So if I'm trying to work on a project, I don't know how to do something, well, let me ask the AI instead of let me ask Google. So I was kind of just trying to switch my workflows, and it does work really, really well for technology that exists before 2021. which they
Right,
do
right.
put the disclaimer saying that, the index or the model was just trained, they're not familiar with knowledge after 2021 or a date within a month within 2021. And you do start to hit areas with that, especially if I try to reference a newer, let's say, JavaScript framework like Solid.js or Svelte or some of these new frameworks I'm just kind of starting to look into and kind of playing around with. And if I try to ask them about some newer technology, it knows nothing. I would even say it even has some issues with Windows 11. So I asked, how can I speed up Windows 11? I say, well, Windows 11 really hasn't been announced by Microsoft yet. But if you want to, these are some of the steps you could do. So
Yeah.
So little things like that, which is, I don't know, like I said, that's what I thought when Microsoft made a deal with Bing, I was curious how fast, because now Bing should have access to more of the internet or recent information, how fast that was going to be introduced in the
how fast
model.
they're going to train it. So someone I know from back in my days, she used to be, what was she? She was, I think, the first head of marketing at Twilio, is working on what you're kind of referring to, which instead of asking it questions about a set of data it has already ingested and kind of added to the model, proactively go out and like a Google crawl. At least this is my understanding. I've wanted to sign up, haven't signed up yet, but wanted to sign up for it. But like a Google crawl, go find the information on it, and then summarize it for me and be my research assistant. Essentially, go find the information now. And I thought that's an interesting play on it. So I haven't signed up yet. I hope to sign up soon and take that for a spin, because that seems really interesting. Have you used ChatGPT for much code stuff?
No, like I said, I would trying to mostly for when I want to get some examples for class. That's what I've really been using it for. So like if I, write me an example of how to do, it was with, what was it? With the CSS grid. I was just curious, write me a complex example of using a CSS grid for a modern website. And it actually did a pretty good job of giving me basically a CSS template with good CSS. When you define a CSS grid, you have to define areas within the grid, define like the header, the main area, side, article or sidebar, footer, and you kind of define the sections of the grid. And then it did a pretty good job of that. So I thought like using it for generating kind of templates or starting kind of projects to kind of, to get started with actually has been pretty,
so give you kind of that base starting point.
Or also too, when I'm trying to also figure ways to explain advanced concepts, like I learned about anonymous parameters 10 this week. Do you know about anonymous parameters?
In
Have
Python?
you ever heard of this before?
Is this
it was new to me? No, it actually in Kotlin.
Oh, in Kotlin. Okay, anonymous parameters.
Yeah, because for my Android programming class for the mobile development, we got into one of the code examples from the book, and I looked at it as I was kind of prepping for the class. I was like, "Ooh, that looks strange. I don't know what these underscores are, where there should be parameter names for a function." And I was like, "Okay, this looks very, very
so
strange."
It's a function declaration
so
which just has underscores instead of what you would expect to be a variable name. Okay.
Yes. So I was like, so what is this used for? So it's an anonymous function. I'm not sure if it's a language feature that's unique to Kotlin or if it came from another language.
Anonymous,
but this is the first time I'm seeing it.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry. Yes, anonymous parameters mostly used within anonymous functions, which also
anonymous functions. I understand.
Students.
We've got them in PHP, and they're very useful.
Yes. And so I've been dealing with that because it's kind of, teaching my students how to use anonymous functions or lambda expressions. That kind of blows their mind because they coming into my class, they have no experience with that at all. So in my web development class with JavaScript, doing a lot with anonymous functions. And then in my Kotlin class, doing a lot with lambda expressions. And so just trying to get them up to speed with that has been kind of a challenge. So with the textbook examples I was using, it starts seeing these anonymous parameters, which are basically just underscores with commas where parameter names should be. And it was like,
but
this?
it's Kotlin, which is a typed language, right?
Mm-hmm.
So normally
Correct.
you would have a type and a variable declaration there.
It's a type, but also types are inferred based on value too. So it's kind of a bridge between, but it is a type safe language. Yes.
So, but normally you would put a variable name there, and then maybe a type or something like that, or
yes, you can do that. Yep. But you're not required to do that too. So that's why it's a little bit of a kind of a mix. But the way these parameters work is like if you're using it within, say, anonymous function or expression, and if, let's say, you're mostly for handlers. So if you, let's say, set a listener or some type of event listener on top of a a UI element, and then you want to have a function that'll handle that event. That data coming into that function, that's being passed into that function. There's let's say there could be 4 different arguments, but maybe your expression will only use one of them. So you don't need to use all 4 of them. You're just going to reference one of them. So what you do is you give the name of the one you want to reference in the order, the specific order of it is, and then you use underscores to designate the anonymous parameters that you're not using.
Oh, so you just like ignore these. You know what you're going to be called with.
Yeah.
And you basically say, I'm not going to care about the first, the second, and the fourth argument, but the third one I want to use. So the rest, I actually don't care what you send me. So I'm not going to get into this place where I've prescribed a type or okay, that's that. Okay.
So once I wrapped my head around that, I got it, understood it. But for somebody just learning it, it's super bizarre and so weird. Even for me, like I've been doing JavaScript or development for many, many years, and seeing this, I was like, whoa, this is kind of weird and strange. And so I had to figure out a way to explain this to students. So I did try to use ChatGPT to try to describe me what a anonymous parameter is. I actually think it actually did a pretty good job of that. I actually knew about that.
Have you passed it code yet? Because I've seen people give ChatGPT a piece of code and tell me, or say, what does this do?
What I usually do is if it gives me an example or part of an example that I don't, let's say there's, like I said, the anonymous function, there's something with the syntax I don't understand. I'll say, oh, could you clarify this name? Okay. And what is this actually doing within the function? And then it does a pretty good job about that. But I haven't copy pasted in code and said, convert this to another language. Just tell me what this explain this.
I've seen some people do that. It's really interesting. I haven't done that yet. Because it's almost the inverse of GitHub Copilot. Where it's almost like, hey, take this function and tell me what it does, and almost build those comments. Now, obviously, like we've talked about that before, the cooking show style comments. Hopefully, your code's readable enough that if you understand the language, you're just like, oh, I see what this does. I don't need someone to tell me what it does. But if it's completely understand, like sometimes when it's some type of algorithmic type behavior, and it may not be obvious what it's doing, as a whole. Having like AI look at it and say, oh, I understand what this is doing. Let me write a human-friendly, description of what's going to happen when you give this input, and then the output, that's what's going to happen. I thought that was useful.
That'd be a nice IDE feature. I think JetBrains should work on that.
Pass it and say, build.
So if you're going through the code, just select this block of code and say, explain this to me.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there may have been actually a plugin for that somebody's playing with. I just wonder, like for your students' code, that might be interesting at some point to paste in some of their code and ask ChatGPT. So, what's this supposed to do?
That would actually be a good thing, say, because I had some students ask me some questions because, specifically in the mobile development class, because they're coming into it, and I told them in front, we're going to be baby stepping into Kotlin. Don't get too stressed about it. Think of it like if you know JavaScript, and most students should know JavaScript coming into the course. Problem is they know a very simplified version of JavaScript, and using even, let's say, anonymous functions in JavaScript just blows their mind. So kind of getting up to that speed, but what they do is they kind of get their head in this place of like, oh, I can't understand it. Like I need to understand Kotlin in order for me to understand what this is doing. Well, not really. Like, yes, Kotlin does have its own unique features. Like I said, the anonymous parameters. I didn't know about that. I had to look that up. So if you see something, you can look it up, right? In Google, right? And still teaching students how to Google is a valuable skill that
pretty much all the developers do. I mean, like if you can't Google something, I'm not sure you're a developer.
But I tell them, like, it's really, once you can know how to program in one language, learning another language is not that difficult. If you can just understand, core patterns and just right ways to read the code and understand it in order to write it. But they get so hung up with the fact, like, oh, it's Kotlin. I don't know Kotlin, so like I'm just going to throw my hands up and just leave. I'm like, well, what does it look like? If I would compare it to JavaScript, if I would take this function and rewrite JavaScript, which actually wouldn't take that much work, they would get it then. So it's like kind of making that leap, which maybe AI can help, providing that translation layer that people need or developers need, going from one language to the next. I see some value in that.
I've not tried that either. That like, hey, here's a code example, and can you write this in, can you take this PHP code example and do the same thing in JavaScript? That'd be interesting to see.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been an interesting semester. I'm enjoying my courses. Like I said, with my JavaScript classes or the web technologies class, which primarily been working with JavaScript.
That's
at
not
this
the
point.
Keystone one, is it?
Yes, so that's the one where you're basically showing them the
And they're going to have
whole
to build
kind
an
of
API and all that kind of stuff.
from client side to back end, from the full stack. It should be called the full stack course. That's really what it should be called. So we've been mostly spending the past, let's say, 5 to 6 weeks on JavaScript. And coming to the course, they didn't do much with HTML, CSS because they should know that, but just spending a lot of time on JavaScript because realizing from their client side class, they just knew how to use basic on-click,
Oh, okay. It's like use
binding the
JavaScript
functions.
to
That's really
enhance the UI
yeah.
behavior a little bit, and not like
Yeah.
actually writing
So just
stateful
getting them
applications.
used to, like I said, event listeners and with the anonymous functions, just getting to that point to understand that value is like, then I think I finally got them there because now next week we're getting into
Okay.
React. So because you really need to understand, that kind of the prereq information first. So that's been a bit of a challenge, but yeah, I think they've been getting it. So it's been a good class. Like I say, in the Android class, I've been liking learning Kotlin. It's like it's about back when I was doing Android development was with
Right.
Java. So kind of seeing the differences between Kotlin and Java has been super, super interesting, and really liking
Yeah.
Kotlin. Super,
I mean,
really
it's
liking
still
it.
it's a compiled type language, right? How
Mhm. But like I said, but it does give some flexibility where type is still inferred from value. So if you want to kind of make it a little bit, it gives you like a lot of options, put it that way. I think that's what I like about it, where like it is a type safe language. So it will definitely throw type errors especially if you do something, let's say if the type is inferred by, let's say an integer, and you try to, without converting it, do something like a string, it would definitely throw a type error at you. So it definitely is a type safe language, like within the compiler. But it does give you some flexibility in how you designate types, and how also when you designate, you declare variables from like your privates to like when they get initialized to, like having also like the difference between like a val and a var. That was something new too. You could define like a variable just like you could in any other language, like, like JavaScript or Java with like the var keyword, but then you use
Okay.
val, then it's more of a constant.
Oh, okay.
Declare it. So it's like a
Is that like
scoped
a
constant.
JavaScript that would be let, right? Is that no? Yeah. Because
Yes.
that's something that you
Yes.
won't change
Yep.
the value of this.
Yep.
What's essentially
Yep.
used as a variable anywhere
Yeah,
else.
you still have the constant keyword, but it's interesting. Kind of little things like that are interesting that the language introduces, so it provides a lot of flexibility in in the way you're coding, but also familiarity too. If you're used to C# or Java, you should feel right at home.
Yeah, I
with
guess that was my curiosity. Is like, what did they change from Java? Because I feel like it probably borrowed a lot from that. And
Yeah.
is it all right? So, help me understand this one. Well, you used to do Android development in Java, which would compile down to a jar file or something that ran on a virtual machine.
Well, an
Yeah,
APK,
well, yeah, but I mean,
like
a
a package,
that's running
a
on a
compiled down
JVM
package,
somewhere.
yeah.
So Android
Yep.
was running, Android is the operating system
And
had
like,
a,
yeah, it still
had a
compiles
JVM.
down. It still does Kotlin does do that
So
exactly.
Kotlin
still
compiles
does.
down to something that runs on the JVM.
Yep.
Okay,
Exactly.
okay. So
Yep.
we're still targeting the same thing.
It's basically just another layer,
Okay.
above
Okay,
that.
so it's just
Yeah.
instead of writing in Java, you write in here. In the end, we compile down to a similar. I mean, again, I'm not a Java developer, but my understanding is a similar machine style. Oh, what do I want to say? Binary, but that executes not on
Yeah.
a processor, but on a virtual processor. That then does the
Yeah.
translation layer between that and whatever platform you happen to run on, versus a normal compiled language, which would compile down to specific instruction set for either an Intel-based processor, an AMD-based processor, RISC or ARM or whatever your processors are, and then that step happens in that compiler part of the program. So this is Kotlin still compiling down not to something that'll run on hardware, but run on a JVM that's running on hardware. Okay.
So the one thing I really like about it, because remember the last show we had
It was the first show of the year, and then
months ago, it feels like.
nothing happened. Month and a half. I don't know.
I was harping on the fact of like types. Remember?
Oh yeah.
Like,
You were I don't
types. And kind of I was trying to think about my experience with statically typed languages versus
right,
dynamically
because
typed languages.
it was
especially
Python, right? And Python was doing some weird things or not enforcing some types, and you're like, why am I having to do these checks?
So you can have type not labels, but type it is type inferred, by
Like
when you
type
declare a variable,
declaration
you sign some
for functions and stuff
yes,
like
the
that.
type declaration. Yes. You can do that. You can specify the type, but it's more like TypeScript in a sense where it's more of a developer tool, more of a documentation or more of a syntax checker for like with the tooling that you're using. So, but it's not enforced within like the runtime of that. You still will get type errors if you try to do something weird, but it'll be just like a type error in JavaScript when it's done it dynamically. We're trying to figure that out.
So wait. So if you're writing a function in Kotlin, you can just accept a variable without saying what the type is?
Yeah.
And then as long as you use it as it is that type, as if it's that type, everything's fine until you try to do something that you wouldn't be able to do with that type.
Well, if you define, let's say if you're defining a function, then, like I said, I may be incorrect about this, but if you define a function that someone is going to use, well, when you define if you want to implement a function, if you're trying to interface with it, let's say if you're trying to deal with an API, or you're trying to deal with some library, and then you don't have to specify the type on the parameter because the type is already defined
by
the implementation of it,
by the contract with the interface. Okay.
Yeah, you still need to do that. Yeah. But when you are just, let's say, creating, let's say a variable constant, and you need to, the type is inferred by the value.
You don't have to be like, you don't have to be really strict and say, var, and I don't know the syntax, but like var my object and then real object,
which you can do.
But they're just
that's
if you just
like
made it a new object, it's of object type. Okay.
Which I like it because it provides that flexibility. That's why I'm really enjoying Kotlin, because it gives you options. Right, so it still is a statically typed language, and it will enforce that
from the assignment. It's going to be like, that's what that is. Okay.
Yes. So it provides that level of flexibility with you. That's why you kind of feel like when you're programming in Python, you can kind of do something, but it's not the same. So that's why it's
gotcha.
I know. So yeah, I've been really, really enjoying it. Like I said, I'm still new to it, so like I said, most of what I'm probably talking about, I don't know anything about, but it's been kind of fun learning it through this class, getting back to some Android development. It's also seeing the improvements of Android Studio. It's kind of really, really good. Back when I used it, it was about almost close to 8-10 years ago. I don't know. It's been a while. I'm getting old. But back when I was doing some active Android development for clients, it was seeing the improvements since then. I'm like, whoa, it's actually gotten really, really good.
What is what's the final kind of goal of the Android development class? Like what application?
Just for them to make a small like a small, like say a should be more than one screen. Let's say a 2 to 3 screen application, just to do something like a simple utility style application. I have students who are going to be doing like expense trackers to kind of manage like the expenses that they're things they're paying for. I have actually one student who's doing a dice roll manager.
Oh, okay.
For tabletop games. So he's going to have like pre-configured dice rolls and have like, so if some games require like three die, he's going to have, the ability to track multiple dies within a roll and then different sides to different dies. So that's kind of interesting.
It'll do the rolling for you. You're like, I got 3 dies, one's just a normal 6-sided die. Then there's like a D, 25 or something like that. And you hit a button and it shows you.
So it
rolls them for you. That's cool.
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. And then another student's doing, like a fitness tracking. That's very popular, like a fitness health tracking, kind of giving you a suggested list of workouts and then having a ability way to kind of keep track of your workouts. So small utility applications, but I think if they can get to that point at the end and just have something that's functional, either in the similar or, those who have an Android device can be able to see on their phone.
Yeah,
I think it'd be good.
Cool. That's really cool. Are they storing that for the stateful side of things? They're using internal storage for that?
Yeah, for the database, which we're getting into next week.
Or something that runs on the app. I've seen things like that in the past. How?
Yeah, it's just a SQL. Well, we've been mostly just talking about how to use key value stores within files, both for like, let's say statically, let's say XML data we need to load in or we need to write to. Just been kind of doing that just from a file based perspective. But yeah, we're going to get into databases probably the next couple of weeks.
And if like to say that, I remember kind of last time I played with that a lot of them, give like some type of SQLite type storage that is really easy to create a database and just use that.
Which also in all my classes too, just understanding hash maps and dictionaries, key value stores. That's also a big thing. Just getting them to understand that and be able to use that in a practical way. It's been an interesting challenge in all my classes, just because I think they should be introduce that a little bit earlier. I think if students are introduced to, just like they learn variables, arrays, they should just definitely learn dictionaries and understand how to, key can be associated with the value. And then if they could understand first, before they even get to databases, and enforce that, saying you need to understand a key value store before you actually learn a relational database, I think it would be so much better.
This is why they should just teach in PHP, because I mean, in PHP land, an array is a hash, is a map, is a dictionary. It's just all one thing. Yeah, you
Blows
can
your
have it
mind.
all.
How
Yeah,
can that be?
multi-dimensional array dictionary map hash. So it's the whole thing. We actually wrap it and stuff to make them a little bit more concrete. But yeah, yeah. Well, that sounds great.
So, so Tim, I think the
The
whole
whole
world
world
wants
wants
to
to know. I don't
know,
know what the whole world wants to know, but okay. Where have I
where have
been
you
for
been?
3 weeks? I'm
Yes.
not sure what I can actually say.
Well, the podcast safe
Okay, so
version of
here
it.
we go. Here we go. Because I'm not sure what I can actually say. Um, those of you know, like one of my clients is a company named Phone Burner, and you know I've worked.
You don't even need to say the name. You could
Oh
just leave
well,
that part out of it.
I've worked there for almost I want to say 5.5 years, something like that. And I'm just gonna read from our status page, which is public, because I believe if it was put there, it's probably safe for me to say. So
What's
I
the
think it's
URL
just
for that?
status.phoneburner.com, and you can see
Okay.
there's been quite a few updates over the past couple weeks. I'm going to read a particular update that'll give a synopsis of what has kept me away from this podcast for a few weeks. Here we go. On Tuesday afternoon, so this is dated January 26th. So Tuesday afternoon would have been January 24th, I believe. On Tuesday afternoon, our company was made aware of a public notice posted by the FCC to all U.S. based voice providers. As part of that notice, PhoneBurner was listed as one of the service providers for a company placing alleged illegal calls. The notice was clear that calls originating from our platform by the customer named in the notice were to be suspended within a prescribed timeline. We had no advance notice of this public notice, and to our knowledge, neither did our carrier partners. As you have experienced, some of our carrier partners have interpreted the public notice to include all phone burner traffic. In our opinion, this clearly was not the intent of the public notice by the FCC. We are working aggressively to get our services restored, and there are a few material updates to provide you. First, we have retained legal counsel that specializes in working with the FCC. Second, our legal counsel has our legal counsel had meetings this morning with the FCC on our behalf. We believe that the interpretation of that meeting was consistent with the public notice. Simply put, carriers were asked to remove one company's traffic and not all phone burner call traffic. Third, our legal counsel, in partnership with the FCC and PhoneBurner, is identifying a series of modest and near-term steps that can be taken to help us reactivate our outbound dialing services. This is the most important step. Fourth, to help appropriately set expectations, service could be restored in the next few hours to the next few days, depending on some factors described above. We will share more information regarding the timeline of service restoration with you as soon as we have it. Our teams are working around the clock on this, and service restoration is our top priority. Thank you for your trust in PhoneBurner. Please know that we are doing all that we can to reactivate our outbound dialing services. So that was on Thursday, I believe. And if you scroll through these updates, you'll see that Friday we started carrying outbound calls again. And then as of, I forget what the date is, but a little bit ago, we considered ourselves back and fully restored.
So could you, if you're able to,
boy,
are you able to qualify what is an alleged illegal call?
Well, it would be
Through a
a
service
call
like
that the
yours.
FCC says you're not allowed to make.
Well, that's what I mean. How do you define that? Because I don't know anything about the FCC.
Yeah,
How
so
would they define that?
if you read the FCC notice, which is public and you can find it, I'm sure, with some Google skills, there are a bunch of calls I think that the FCC considers illegal. One of those would be, for example, a robocall, which my understanding of robocalling is when, and I think we all have this, like you pick up the phone call and you can tell on the other side it is just a pre-recorded audio that's playing. That is illegal. My understanding. I'm not
Okay.
a lawyer, okay? I'm the furthest thing from a lawyer. My understanding is that is illegal, and that obviously, yeah, it's not our intent to do
So
that.
it's more so it wasn't like okay. That's more of like from a marketing spammy type type of call, but it wasn't like a legal call where like something's doing something nefarious.
I think that would probably also be illegal. And if you find the FCC notice, you may see that they describe some things that they feel were illegal about that. I can't comment specifically, but you can certainly find the notice and see what they called out as illegal behavior.
Okay. So what? And the other carriers. So so with Twilio, like you mentioned, like
did.
Twilio. Well, not in the, maybe before the
I think the only mention I
or the
made
other.
was that there's a AI based platform that is being created by a former um, head of marketing that used to work for Twilio years ago that I know because we interacted,
Okay.
back when Twilio was small and
Because
young and growing back in 2010ish. So
so and then it was one of your cut, and it was one of the customers that this came through, just because of that's why you were
it
the
was a
company was liable.
former customer that the
Okay.
FCC alleges was making illegal calls.
And so they flagged that, but then that kind of then that caused other then say that, okay, if all communications coming out
Some
of this service to
carriers
be flagged.
interpreted that to.
And then when I mentioned Twilio, that would be considered like a carrier in a sense,
Yeah,
or a
yeah. Like there's
provider.
tons of carriers in the market, right?
Okay.
Like
Okay.
we
Yeah.
think of carriers a lot like big names like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile. Those are the ones that everybody knows from a cell phone
And without
provider.
those, the business would have
Oh,
issues
certainly. I mean,
running.
our business is
So, okay.
making and receiving phone calls, so we need carrier partners to be able to deliver those calls. And it took us there. I will say, carefully what I can say, right? But from the inside, I will tell you that I could not be. And for anybody who reads the public notes and they're like, oh, really, what do I want to say? There, if you Google some of this, you'll see opinions on this and whether or not people think that it was right for carriers to interpret this FCC notice that way and attempt to essentially just shut us down and turn us off. Before
Do you-
January 24th, I was
you-
proud of working for
Well,
PhoneBurner. After January 24th, I'm still proud to be working for PhoneBurner. So if you
Mm-hmm.
know anything about me, you know what my opinion is on whether or not anything that we're doing is, the things that we're doing is above board and honest and that. So that said, from the inside, the amount of work and the dedication of this team to get things up and running. And if you scroll through this update, you'll see we're a team of about 80. That's what it says there. Um, everybody, everybody was working. I don't want to call anything out because I don't want to give too many details, but from the top down, and the dedication and the fact that, to my knowledge, in any of the meetings I was in, there was never a heated, we're all in crisis mode and no, it was professional, and we got the job done, and I think quicker than anybody else could. And if there's a benchmark to be set, I think we're going to be the measuring stick because this was a surprise,
Well,
and we responded in a way that I think was quite honestly amazing.
Well, it is interesting the fact that like this issue is caused from an outside source. It wasn't like it's not like one of your developers did something nefarious or
Right,
did
right.
something you messed up some code that caused huge downtimes, and then blame had to be,
This
assigned
was
to something or
completely
somebody, right?
external. Yeah.
It's outside of your control. So that's why, it makes sense that the whole team would
Yeah.
rally behind
Yeah,
that.
and I couldn't be prouder. Couldn't be prouder. And we're back up and running. Had to make some significant changes to some of our code, and I am super proud of the dev team for all the work that they put in because there was a lot to work to be put in. And I'll say that one of the reasons, and this is just this is a developer podcast, so let's talk about being developers, right? The reason we
Yeah.
could have devs that worked many hours, right? Like we're talking huge amounts of hours in a week to get everything up and running again, is because we don't do that all the time. We don't have that startup culture of, oh, we're building the next most important thing, and the expectation is that you're sleeping at the office. Though, let's be honest, I do sleep at my office because it's my home. But we don't do that all the time. So when something like this happened, the dev team had the capacity to actually put
true.
in long hours and write good code because they weren't burnt out because we're always asking too much of them. So it was a hard thing to go through. But on the other side, I could not be prouder of this team, both the dev team that I work with and the entire team at PhoneBurner. So
So one thing essentially that I'm thinking about as you're talking about this issue, which is one of my favorite things to worry about and complain about, is dependencies.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, and this, because and we can kind of get away from talking about phone burner, but this kind of brings up an interesting thing about just businesses or people who are thinking about, startups or building products, building something that relies or has a huge dependency on somebody else or something
Yeah, you
else.
could talk about it from a
Right, 'cause
code
phone burner
perspective,
has
right? We've talked about that before. How dependent am I on
Yeah.
this framework, and what happens when it's not
But
maintained? But yeah, you have other dependencies from a business standpoint.
but just as a platform
Yeah.
too for developers, let's say if they build their application that is reliant on API services or hosting providers, and if they really build in such a way where, like, if one of those platforms go down or has issues with them, which is kind of a similar case to what you went through, then what are you going to
Yeah,
do?
it's
Can you just move to a different platform or something? Because your company's like, you're reliant on the providers that are providing the outbound, right? The SMS, the voice, right?
Well,
The telecommunications
let's
companies
move
for
away
that.
from our specific example to another very relevant example, right? How many applications were tied to the Twitter API? Either to do some
Yeah.
interesting things, and they were in the free tier, which is now gone, as I understand it. Which to me is, I mean, it's interesting. I don't really care either way about all that, and it's not as meaningful to my life as many people on Twitter seem to think it's meaningful to theirs. So whether the API is free or not, all right, whatever. I find it interesting because the Twitter API was always, because it was a service that everybody's familiar with. And it was to some extent a very simplistic service, right? Just think of it in terms of Facebook versus Twitter, right? Twitter, you post something, that's it. That's all you do. Facebook, hey, welcome to the open API or
Yeah.
the GraphQL, where you can pull your hair out trying to figure out how to form a query to find the one thing that you care about, right? So Twitter was a very straightforward. You got what it did. You could send a tweet, you could read a tweet. So if you were a developer and you were trying to show some code technique, I will tell you, I am not going to be able to do a talk that I used to do because I would consume the Twitter not the actual Firehose, but their streaming API, which was limited by whatever filters it had, to show how
Yeah.
to ingest a stream of data in PHP with a long running process, do some work, handle it, gracefully. I can't do that anymore. So and not that Twitter cares about, Tim giving a talk at a conference is going to show off our API.
I'm sure Elon
yeah.
is sad for it. I think
But
he is.
but from that standpoint, what they've done is they've taken away an example that people would use that would also potentially encourage developers to want to build something interesting with their platform.
That is true.
I know they're looking at it from a completely different perspective now, and they're looking at, well, is it actually making us any money? Totally get that. Understand that. You can have differences of opinion on whether or not it's important or not. So I understand the perspective that they're taking. But by taking away the free tier, you took away a lot of little interesting applications that may have made the ecosystem just a little bit nicer, and you just took them away. And you took away people using your service as an example because you had a free tier where I could just, oh yeah, everybody understands what this is. So now you don't have to be like, oh, what does that API do? No, you get what the Twitter API does because you get what Twitter does. So it made a really easy way to show example code when you're talking about consuming or working with APIs, specifically streaming APIs, because you got what the Twitter stream was. You didn't have to explain that like you'd have to explain some other type of streaming API. Or I'm sorry, streaming data API, because I say streaming API and people probably think I'm talking about videos and audio. So that on that side. But they also changed the terms of service to say if you were providing an application that was similar to what Twitter itself did, you were now in violations of the terms of service. And they changed it and then said, oh, look at all these people that are violating it. It's like, well, yeah, you just changed it yesterday. So hello. But if that was, if you were an application whose main, or at least 30% say, or 33, like, because you got Facebook, you got Twitter, I don't know, what's the other social networks? I don't even know. Oh yeah, Instagram, which is really Facebook.
Facebook.
You've got those, and if you're,
WhatsApp,
if you're
Facebook.
if you're some type of social media application, and Twitter's 30% or so of the value, and you're posting it, and now you're in violation of your terms of service. Well, yeah, your entire business proposition had a dependency that was completely in the control of somebody
Yeah.
else. And that is something to consider when you're building those things that then use somebody else's service.
Yeah, because the one platform I always talk about is Firebase, and I love it. It's easy to get started with. It's static hosting is great, and also they provide you a lot of good API features like the functions, they provide like machine learning APIs you can kind of tie into. So it's the platforms like that, just like AWS or the whole Google Cloud for applications that build entirely on one platform and depend upon all those services. Does that become a risk? And so that's one thing I start to think about, start to worry about, start to, going back to PHP and think about if we could make our, the one thing about PHP is nice, it ran everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So let's say if one server went down on one cloud host, you go, let's move our application to the cloud host. There'll be some DNS issues we have to work out, but it's definitely possible, right? But then all of these, servers or single page applications that are running on, CDNs, which is great because hosting is usually not an issue, but it's just, building your application on a platform that could have issues with you or just have issues in general, does become a little bit of a risk. And also thinking about ChatGPT,
like we can think of it the risk like what we just faced, right? That something happens and people are like, well, we don't want to do business with you anymore. But it's probably far more likely that it's more like a Twitter thing, where our
terms
business
of service,
our perspective on business changes. Therefore, we no longer want to do business not with you, but with all your kind of things. And that's what you're like from a Firebase standpoint is, well, there's lots of convenience for it, right? But what if Google just one day said, and it's Google, with Google, you're more likely that they're just gonna be like, oh, we're gonna shut that one down. Sorry, it's just gonna go away.
Yeah, which they like to do. Yes.
Oh, you like that chat app? No, now there's this chat app.
Oh, there's a great. You ever see that graveyard page for Google for all the services and applications that they just shut down? It's a great page. But or just because I've been hearing rumors with people I follow that are really good Firebase experts or influencers. They're saying that slowly over the years they've been kind of trying to transition Firebase customers or features of Firebase back to Google Cloud. Try to bring them back to the mothership in a sense, because Firebase is just a layer above Google Cloud that makes a lot of the Google Cloud features just easy to access. So, but then that could eventually happen where maybe Firebase just becomes.
It's not though. Wasn't historically Firebase its own thing that then Google acquired?
Maybe when it first started. I don't know about when it first started, but basically is everything you're accessing in Firebase just a layer above Google Cloud. That's all it is. Just makes it easier to work with. But think about with ChatGPT, I hear like a lot of developers or startups are building applications around machine learning AI, but it's not like their own AI or machine learning models or their own
somebody else's model.
Leverage something else. Yeah. So what if legal issues happen, which will happen with these services? How's that going to affect you? Like, I'd be so worried to build a product or a startup around just specifically tied to
somebody else's model. Yeah, because you're seeing it all over the place with the lawsuits for the image generation models. I am sure you're going to see that again with ChatGPT and whatever that model is. It's like, well, whatever you crawled, were you allowed to crawl it? And we're going to have a lot of discussion about that. Like, if it's crawlable in public, does that mean the intent was for it to be ingestible and made part of somebody else's model? There's going to be a lot of conversations around that.
One thing that came up at my school, because we had an artist come in and do a talk and show some artwork, where he's a former designer. He's retired now, but he's super into the DALL-E, the Midjourney, the image generation, and doing it from an art base. So he doesn't just do prompts to generate his art. He basically starts with like a photograph that he's taken or a painting that he's made, and then he basically gradually tries to use DALL-E or Midjourney to try to provide transitions or generative images from that. So it's kind of an interesting process. And you talk to this process. The students were up in arms. It's so funny how developers all about, bring in the AI. Let's make our jobs easier, right? Artists, creatives, oh my gosh, they're freaking out like crazy, and they hate it. They hate even just the mention of AI and art. They hate.
They should embrace it.
But I was thinking,
I'm sorry, I just got to say, they should embrace it because it's going to teach them to be more creative.
That's why it's certain faculty that are forward-looking, saying this is going to be a tool that everyone's going to be using. It's just a reality. It will evolve. Maybe there's definitely going to be issues from a legality standpoint, and that needs to get worked out. But let's say 5 years from now, yes, every designer is going to be using AI tool. Either it's going to be built into their applications. Right. I talked to them about like Photoshop, Illustrator, the tools that they're taught how to use. they are building AI features into
You're
those
gonna draw
applications.
something, and then you're gonna tell the computer
Yeah.
how you want it to be modified or how you want it to be changed. You're going to say, well, this was the essence of it. Can you give me some variations trying these different color palettes? And then you'll be like, oh, I really like that one. It's
So the one thing, think about from Dolly or Midjourney, what I really would like to see them do, they just need to document, okay, so if this image is generated, just give just some raw stats of saying this was a generative image that was based on a million different sources. Maybe you could give a rough idea of what those sources were, and just to disclose that. Just have like a little bit of like a prop, like some metadata associated with each image that gets generated, and just to be able to disclose where that actually came from. I think that would probably solve a lot of people's worries about copyright and, taking one person's original artwork and then generating that into something else. I don't know. But I think if they add that feature, that would definitely, I think, would solve a lot of, at least a lot of people's hesitancy about, where is that image coming from? Because you don't know if it's a generative image from 10 images or is it from a million.
But once you
million
train
images.
the model, like even aren't those models trained on images? Even if you're giving it a seed of an image, or even a seed of a set of images that are yours, aren't those models still having to be trained on a vast quantity of?
No, I think it is. No,
art?
I totally agree with that. I just think they need to disclose. Maybe they don't want to give up their secret sauce, but I think they need to disclose that a little bit more. You know what I mean? To really kind of quantify that of how that works. Which maybe they do. Maybe like I said, maybe in some paper that's been written, maybe they do that. I've understood the diffusion process, how they teach how they train the models and how they basically look at the pixels and basically kind of diffuse the pixels for like with the color value to kind of decipher objects within the picture. That's pretty interesting. But just let's say, how much data are they actually working with? Where did they get all the images from, and how?
And I mean, for those, I think that's the big question: is like, where are they getting these images? Are they allowed to? Because if you're just crawling the internet
and
you're fine.
And getting better at removing watermarks too.
Like yeah. Just because you can see the image on Getty doesn't mean Getty said you should use it.
Because it was interesting. Like when the artist was doing his talk, he was showing his portfolio work, and he was saying, showing his process. So he has one page is kind of showing, okay, this is the final art piece. These are all of the images that led to this, and you could see in those interim images that he was running through Dali or Midjourney, you could see little watermarks like at the corner and the sides there. And I didn't bug him saying, what is, because he was just showing these are the final images. Like in this final image, he takes those out. He makes sure they're removed. But those are watermarked images that are being used as part of the process, which is kind of funny.
And not his, I'm guessing.
Well, like I said, what he'll do is he'll start with his image, or maybe start with one or two of his images. He'll use a combination of prompts, but also lead in the images that are generated back into the process too. But along the way, he is prompting it, within the process. So at some point, it is bringing in other sources other than his own.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So
that's it. I mean, I'm sure there will be much legal discussion about all of that.
But for developers too, it's just be a little bit.
That too, right? Like Copilot. I feel like there's probably plenty of companies that are very concerned about any code that's generated from that, because what then becomes
feature.
Talk about like the license issues, right? Like the copy left and I'm forgetting the actual licenses that are very what do I want to say, invasive, maybe that's the wrong word, but whereas you start using that code, it then says all your code must be licensed this way. What if ChatGPT brings in some of that, and then there's an argument that says, oh, guess what, your whole code base now is open sourced.
I love the GitHub Copilot, using a lot. The one thing that's really been annoying me about it is when it does suggest big large blocks. I wish there was a setting on it, which maybe there is. I have to kind of dig around, and maybe in my GitHub account properties where I have the for the GitHub Copilot configuration. It's too early, Tim. We got to do this show later. I cannot. My brain does not turn on till like later afternoon.
But like people can understand
talk.
You more because you're talking at like a normal pace. But
so I'm not too excited because I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this. But it's when it suggests me one line, so like I complete one line, I hit the return key, and it says, oh, you may want to write this line. I love that feature. That speeds up my time tremendously. But I have found when it starts suggesting big blocks of code, especially when I'm trying to do my lectures, I'm like, no, I don't need that. Back up. Don't suggest that. I just want to do one line at a time. and I'm totally liking it even for my lectures. I can just tab. I can talk through the code. It's really, really useful. And even if I'm working on a side project, it just speeds that time up. But I have been finding some of the big blocks of code has been suggesting. I'm like, I wish I could turn that feature off, because that's great sometimes to suggest like a block that I could use, but then I'm still going to go back and edit that block because there's issues with it.
Well,
and I'm like, I just wish I could just turn that feature off.
It spits out the block, then you copy the block, and you put it in the ChatGPT, and you ask ChatGPT, what does it do? And then ChatGPT tells you
How am I saving time for that?
Like, but can you make it do this?
Gosh.
And in another language, and ChatGPT does that, and then you copy it back. So, no, but that's, I don't know. There's so much like the big blocks where you could be like, oh, I can see exactly where this came from, maybe. But at the same time, it's like, how do you, if you're a developer, you've read open source code, right? So you know how it works. Then what? Are you not able to ever use that knowledge again? This is such an interesting place to be in that
because I know there's a lot of YouTubers who love to do like the whole comment generated Copilot, where they'll put in like their code comments. It's like, okay, write me this application does this, and this, and then they'll just output out the blocks of the code. It's like, oh, you just go back to it. I'm like, practically speaking, I'm like, that's why I don't use it all. Like, I love the fact of like, it gives me a starting point, or I would use ChatGPT to give me a starting point, saying, okay, if I want to start working with this framework, what would be a good place that I could give me a good template that I could get started with? Okay, I'll start with that, and then Copilot kind of helps you along line by line. But once it starts suggesting a lot of code. If you don't fully understand what that code is, that's why I do worry about students who just are going to be what they would usually do in Stack Overflow by copying chunks of code over and pasting it and just saying, oh, it'll work. It works someplace else on Stack Overflow. It should work here. But I don't know. It's kind of, I wish it could just be configured a little bit more. I wish, give some more dials. You can kind of control what it could do a little bit. But I do love it as a developer tool. Have you been using it all in your JetBrains? Works pretty good in the WebStorm or PHP. What's it?
PHP Storm.
What's the PHP?
Yeah, it's PHP Storm,
WebStorm,
Yep.
PHP
They're
Storm.
very similar.
Yeah.
No, I have not. I haven't given that a spin yet. I think I'm not quite sure about it, but I mean,
don't they still have like the 60-day trial?
Or I don't know. I don't know. I haven't played with it, like I said, mostly because I'm just not sure. I'm not sure about it.
Oh,
yet,
okay. From
yeah,
liability standpoint,
yeah, I'm a little concerned about that. But no, I should probably give it a spin. I'm interested too. Have you played with was it GitHub Spaces yet? They seem like because remember there's a paywall in front of them that made them a little hard to get to, but and now it looks like there's a free tier or something like that.
They do. I just need to get. I haven't because I need to get my my school ID. My school ID is back when I first got hired, so my date of my year is like what? I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Like February
and they're like, there's
14th or whatever, 2014 or something like that. So it's, I know my ID is so screwed up. It's so deteriorated. So I can't really, actually, I did try to use it because you take a picture of your school ID to get. So if you wanted to use the GitHub for Classroom or GitHub for educators, you can use Copilot for free. That's why I actually want to do. So I don't have to pay the $10 a month. They can give me Copilot for free. And that could also have access to I'm not sure if they're going to give me spaces for free or maybe some time for that.
Spaces now,
but they may. So that's why I do want to kind of find out more about what type of service they use for education, because I would possibly like to use. Now, in my classes, primarily web design classes, I don't teaching. There's one semester I did teach my computer science students in one of my classes Git, and by the end I got them there, but it was like to get through that process was kind of difficult. So I'm kind of hesitant about putting them in, let's say, a code space, and how much Git repository kind of workflows do they need to kind of get up to speed with. I still use Replit, which Replit has been getting
you said you
better.
Like that. Yeah.
They're providing more and more features. It actually feels more like an IDE in the interface, and it actually is nice. You could actually host applications. They have like their own spaces feature now. So if you want to permanently host an application and give it a custom domain, you can actually do that.
Replit or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool, because that was kind of like my thought with where, and I guess it's GitHub Code Spaces is the product name, right? That felt really good from an education standpoint, because it seemed to me you'd be able to say, put the code in this repository. You can use VS Code pretty much in GitHub. Like there's a VS Code editor, edit, spin up, whatever space you need. Like I think it's a container-based thing where you can spin up whatever runs, runs your code. And there you go. You've got a simple web server ready to go, and it's portable in that you could work from any computer to do it. You don't have to worry about, because that was always the thing when you're trying to show someone how or get someone started with web development. It's like, remember, it's like,
Yeah.
you're gonna run the LAMP stack or whatever that.
I know, that's so annoying.
Was it WAMP? The Windows LAMP stack and
which once you're in development for a while, it's great to the fastest way to develop is running off of your local machine. But getting somebody up to that level to this, be
with
comfortable
like
with that,
Docker and things like that, it's certainly gotten easier. But to get someone set up to do that is hard. So if you can just say clone this repo, and all of a sudden you have a code space and it's running, but that seems like what you've got with Replit anyway. So.
I do, like I said, I'm probably going to take a look at that more over the summer once, because I don't really have time to switch gears right now because I am using Replit and it seems to be working good. But yeah, I am super interested to see what GitHub's offering for educators and see what the kind of the flow of that looks like from a classroom experience, because it is VS Code online, which is great. So they have like the web version of VS Code and how that's connected to, let's say, a space when they start up a project or start an exercise. And if that process, them starting the exercise, getting into VS Code through the browser, and then be able to submit versions of that, if they don't have to do any command line it calls for doing commits, then I think that would actually be great. Because once I start to the command line with students, they're like, oh,
really?
I don't do it. So I know. But the problem is I get these students in the second year when they should have learned the stuff in the first year. And then I feel like I don't want to have my classes be all introductory or just boilerplate content that they need to know in order to kind of do some of the interesting things.
Well, we've got 3 minutes left, and I think we really should address the window in the room. And the window. And that's that you're not on Linux anymore.
Oh yes! Oh my gosh! Yes. Was that the week before last? I don't know. It was 1 week. Because I had my office set up now. I have a side spare where we have our guest bedroom that's actually in the basement that we finished when we rebuilt the house. So that's where I have my sitting desk, where I have my nice Alienware workstation I can play video games at, and I can sit at, and I can close the door if need be. So it's super, super nice. I'm loving that. But so I use my IKEA standing desk now as a permanent standing desk. And I use it primarily for video lectures and Zoom meetings and all my online classes. So that's been working out great. And I was on Linux on every one of my machines, but with my teaching, I had I had Zoom crash on me on Linux 3 times during class. And I had to reboot my computer once to get it working again. So it was not like Linux. The Linux I love, and as a developer, it's the platform that if I just had to develop stuff, I would just use Linux. But once you start working with applications like Zoom, even OBS feels like it just works a little bit better. I think because the devices connecting like the webcams and mics, it just feels a little bit better. So certain software that's just better supported on Windows, I just have to go back. So I went back to Windows, I know, on all my machines, just because I was tired dealing with software crashing on Linux. I know that's not Linux's fault or Pop OS's fault, but the applications not as well supported. So I don't know.
I mean, that's why I live in a mixed mode, right? Like, so I have my Linux desktop that I do for all development happens on that. But this, I'm on my Surface over here. This, like, doing the stream, I do Zoom from the Surface. I do Fusion 360 if I'm doing CAD stuff. I do it from the Surface. I do any audio editing on the Surface.
Tim, I'm like Einstein. You know how Einstein wore like the same thing every day?
Did he? I mean, I did.
He did. So it's because he didn't want the mental space. He didn't want the mental space to be distributed about what he was wearing. It's also Steve Jobs.
Are you sure that's Steve Jobs? I'm pretty sure that was Mark Zuckerberg. But
But that's why I can't go back and forth. If I'm going to do one, I'm going to go one operating system. I got to go all in because I don't want the mental space to be spread apart.
They're basically the same thing. They run an application. I mean, come on. It's not about the Chrome that gets you there, not the browser, but it's not about that.
No, even just the term, like I use PowerShell on Windows.
Yeah, I don't use that's the thing. To me, the operating system is the indicator of the application I'm using. If I'm on Windows, I'm doing Windows stuff. If I'm on Linux, I'm doing development.
I thought about this. And I may do this. If I can just run Windows just purely by PowerShell and just start applications by PowerShell, I may just do that.
It's 2023, and Mark's like, I've invented DOS. Well, I guess. Hopefully it won't be another month and a half or whatever it was for next show, but we'll see you next week. And yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
We hope so. We'll see. All right, that feels like a clean break there. I'm gonna hit end stream so we can stop